Welcome to the Christian Campfire Conversations podcast, where we have real conversations about real topics. Our goal is to educate believers in order to fulfill the Great Commission. So without further ado, let's get on to the podcast.
What's up, my basic family, my brothers and sisters in Christ? We are here again with Ashley Chestnut, and Keegan's here too. So
invited me.
He's here every week. So it's kind of
they haven't kicked me off yet.
It is what it is,
despite their biggest efforts. So by there I mean Max.
Honestly. So last week we're just gonna jump right into it. We already know how you've been doing. We already know what you've been enjoying. So last week we talked a lot about kind of what the sexual sin might look like and the shame it brings on and the lack of identity or the putting our identity in things that aren't going to fill us up. And so now we really get to talk about how we deal with this. So like, what are some of the root causes of the sexual sin that you see in girls and guys alike, but specifically in your ministry?
Yeah, and I think I'm gonna pivot there, Max, because I do want to make sure we hit on just how do we deal with the shame. I think Keegan had mentioned offline. We need to make sure we hit that, so I'm going to do it while it's fresh on the brain. So when you think about like how do we deal with shame, I would say there's two big things to keep in mind. One of them is we need to know how to self-regulate and calm ourselves down. And so even the breath work that I talked about in the last episode, being able to slow ourselves down so that we can think clearly. And that's a big key, is we need to have a way to help ourselves slow down, think more clearly. Breath work is great for that. The second thing that is also helpful for dealing with shame is joy. But how do we get to joy? And gratitude is really like an on-ramp to joy. And so practicing gratitude, and that's often why we need to slow down first, because we're not just going to be able to ramp to gratitude from joy or from shame. And so even with gratitude, it's not just let me list the things that I'm grateful for. That's great. But you want to engage the right hemisphere of the brain, just because of how shame is operating. You've got two hemispheres in the brain. Right hemisphere, we think and process first and fastest out of the right hemisphere of the brain. And right hemisphere of the brain is also where character development happens. And so we do a lot with images in our right hemisphere. It's very much relational, where I'm if I walk into a room and I'm reading the room and responding to it, but I don't even have language for what I'm doing yet, that's evidence I'm operating out of my right hemisphere. Left hemisphere is more words, and there's definitely logic in the prefrontal cortex, which is the front. And so what I want to do is, I can tell you truth all day long. I can tell you that if you are a Christian, you are a child of God. You are saved by grace through faith. Like, he sees you as holy and righteous. Like, me saying those things to you and speaking that identity to your shame is very left hemisphere of the brain. That's why it doesn't often sink in. If we don't feel that's true, that's evidence that we experience a disconnect. Like, those things are not integrated between our right and left hemispheres. So how can I address shame in a right hemisphere brain kind of way? So going back to joy and gratitude, let's start doing some visualization. And I know I just got super technical, so you might have just felt like you were in science class or something, or psych class. But a visual that I'll do is even with like happy memories. So if you can like think about a happy memory you've experienced. So maybe it's a family vacation, or maybe it's a fun time with you two guys hanging out recently, in person and not just on camera.
Yes, all the time.
And so if you were just to set a timer, and for 5 minutes you are replaying, watching that memory in your mind, like you're watching a movie on a movie screen, very Inside Out Pixar kind of situation here, and use your 5 senses as you're rewatching that happy memory. What were you seeing and hearing and tasting and touching? And so spend some time rehearsing that memory, asking those questions, thinking about it on a very sensory level. But here's the thing, God was with you in that time and place because God's always with us. So insert Jesus into the memory. Where is he? Where is he in that place? What's his body language? What's his facial expression? What's his posture? What is that communicating about what he thinks about you, about what he thinks about this place and being here with you? And so when I do that with people, and sometimes I work up to that depending on how well I know the person. I might do the happy memory. Let's do that a couple of times before I introduce Jesus into it. But what I'm trying to do is help you get to joy. I'm helping you remember in a very right hemisphere of the brain kind of way. You can actually rewire the brain for greater resiliency with joy and gratitude if you were to regularly do 5 minutes a day of that. And
Wow,
and so, yeah, isn't that crazy? And this isn't just science. Like I have lived this and seen this, even just with my own burnout, even with my own mental health. Like I have seen God use these types of right hemisphere of the brain activities in my own resiliency. And so, but it is affecting shame because we need to be able to move out of shame into joy. Gratitude's a way to do that, rehearsing these memories in a very visual way. And this is just one activity out of many. But that visual side of things gives me something to focus on, ground myself in, and I'm bringing the Lord into it. And sometimes what people see about the Lord needs to be reframed. So I will give that caveat. I learn a lot about how a person sees the Lord depending on what they share from that. But those are some starting points.
Well, and I think one from I'll bring up something from a previous guest we had that was really helpful the way that he worded it to me. You talked about we hear that we're saved by grace through faith. We hear that. We believe that, and he stressed the importance of and the difference between belief that and belief in. I believe that because I've been told that over and over again, but my actions are going to show that I believe in that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I had one young lady also dealing with sexual sin who we had talked about the Lord's Prayer at Bible study that night. And she came up to me afterwards. She said, Ashley, I really don't like to pray, and that's a problem. And I was like, yeah, it kind of is, but I'm glad you shared this. But
yeah, she's recognizing it. That's good.
Let's talk about this. And so I just said, just right now, close your eyes. And when you imagine who you're praying to, who are you visualizing? What are you visualizing? And she closed her eyes, and when she opened it, if you're a listener, I'm going to try to describe what I'm doing, but she just mind actions like this, where somebody is just shaking and wagging their finger at her, shaking their head in disappointment and anger. And if that's when you think about praying and that's who you imagine you're praying to, I wouldn't want to talk to that either.
Yeah.
No.
But it's that disconnect where if you were to ask her what she thought about God, she would have told you God's loving and good and kind and gracious. But there was a disconnect there in how she was functionally relating to him.
So So also, like, we need to have this proper view of God and who he is, and also like act on that proper view of God. Kind of what you're saying there.
Yeah. Yeah. So what is my view of God? And how do I view God viewing me?
Yeah. Like I think I'm trying to think if it was, I think it's A.W. Tozer that said, oh man, I'm gonna butcher the quote, but he said
The
something along
most
the lines
important
of,
thing about a person.
yes, is how they describe God or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, their
And so I
perception
think
of God, their view of God.
is the most important thing about a person, and it tells you, how they're, how they may be wanting to live their life. Like obviously, like if I view God as loving and kind, like I want to live a loving and kind life, but I'm not always going to do that, right? And so you kind of talked about how does God view us in that way? Like how, you know, we talked about how we should view God. How does God view us as humans? Because I mean, I know for me, I'm pretty nasty and terrible and dirty and sinful. So
As are we all. Yeah. Yeah. The prodigal son story is just beautiful and on so many levels. That's also another one I'll read over somebody and have them close their eyes and visualize it, but put themselves in the shoes of the prodigal. And and so, when you're imagining the prodigal in a far off country, imagine you in whatever sin you've committed this week. And so that's you being the prodigal. And when the prodigal is in the pig pen, man, think about that pig pen and what would you smell if you're in the pig pen? What would you be feeling? What would you be tasting or touching if you're hungry, you're just working with pigs? And then when you do come to your senses and you're like, I'm going to go back to my father, the shame that the prodigal had to feel as they were journeying that entire journey back to the father. I wonder what and this isn't a real story, it's a story that Jesus told, but I wonder what the prodigal would have felt or been thinking or expecting from the father, bracing themselves, what's the response I'm going to get? And if you're visualizing this, I really slow down because when you're looking at how does the father respond in Luke 15, oh man, it's just so pretty. I'm turning there so I can read it to you. But if you look in Luke 15, it says, and he arose and came to his father, but while he was still a long way off, his father saw him. Like the father, like long distance, which means the father is also looking. There is hopefulness there. There is desire there that the prodigal would return. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion and ran and embraced him and kissed him. And when you think about how the prodigal had slighted their father, had totally sinned against the father, and this is how the father responds. Put yourself in the shoes of the prodigal. You are the prodigal. I'm the prodigal. And the father's response, how the father views the prodigal, is with compassion, embracing you. Do you believe that God delights in you and enjoys you even in your sinful mess and sinful state? Do you believe that he still enjoys you and likes you and and would embrace you even in the midst of it? And restores you. He restores the prodigal who doesn't deserve it. And so even again, these stories, they're in the Bible, but it's the truth that hits our left hemisphere, but visualizing it, putting yourself in the place, it also helps you integrate the truth with pictures that we can recall and that are very striking and meaningful to us. It's why art is so meaningful to us. It's why music is so meaningful to us. So helping people connect to the truth in those deeper ways.
Yeah, and I think that kind of what you've said kind of it relates back to the shame of it all, and why when we're in the sin and once we've committed the sin, the lie that we tell ourselves is how could God accept me back, or some might say how could someone ever accept me back? I'm like, well, God is someone that shows grace. Jesus is somebody who shows grace when we least deserve it. I like, talking about visualization, the thing I like to visualize is the visualization of Jesus being poked in the side with a spear and, water and blood pouring out of him.
Yeah.
And the visualization of that leaving his body, the life leaving his body, and my sin leaving with it. And that just thinking of the crucifixion, that is probably some of the most powerful in my instance. That's helped me out a lot to see how actually forgiven I am. I had written down a couple things. So how can we recognize that we have an improper view of how God sees us, And then how do we adjust our view of, or, say we have an improper view of how we view God. And then how do we adjust to get the proper view of God?
Yeah.
And put it in our
So,
right side of the brain.
yeah.
Yes. Move it.
Yeah. So, how do we recognize it and then how do we reframe it? I mean, this is just going to be off the top of my head. So even in recognizing, I mean, one of them is do the visualization of when you think you're praying to God. Just like I mentioned earlier about this one girl, who do you picture yourself praying to? Where are they in the room, even right now? So that's helpful. What is your interest or desire or motivation for reading the Bible and prayer? Like, so is it something that you desire to do? Is it something that you feel duty bound to do? Is it something that's more of a legalistic pressure? So even like my heart behind, because I can even be doing it, but be doing it with mixed or poor motivation. So what is the motivation that I have even for spiritual disciplines and engaging with them that can say something about how I'm viewing God or myself? I need to spend some time thinking about that and identifying it. If I am living in unrepentant sin right now, that's already expressing what I view about God to some degree. And it might just be that, man, I love my sin more than I love God. But that is expressing something about how I view God. So those would be some big ones. Another is going back to guilt and shame. I had a young lady, it's been a couple of years, but I had one young lady that in the midst of a porn addiction. And I had just asked her to think back to the last time that she viewed porn and kind of replay to like maybe a couple of minutes before she literally was looking at the pornography on her phone. And so as she was walking through what did she do in those minutes leading to acting out, I did the whole God was there in the room with you bit, because he was. But where is he? If you were to visualize it, where was God in the room in the moments before you were about to look at porn? He knew what you were about to do. You knew what you were about to do. And how do you see God seeing you as you were about to sin or the last time that you sinned? And it was very striking, some things that she shared. It was actually very positive because her view of God was he sees what she was about to do. He knew, but he was there with her. He still cared about her, and his face was one of compassion on her weakness. And that is strong. That's a God that I can turn back to.
Right.
If that's how I'm viewing him. So even how do I view God looking at me the last time I acted out in my sinfulness, whatever that is?
Yeah, I think an awesome verse that I've always liked that I've that kind of relates to this is from Hebrews chapter 2, and he's talking about Jesus, and he says in verse 17, therefore he had to be made like his brothers in every respect so that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in the service of God to make propitiation for the sins of the people. For because he himself has suffered when he tempted, he is able to help those who are being tempted. So I mean, Jesus understands our struggles more than we might. and and he's there helping us. And obviously it says like brothers, and it's using the guy, but that's the same for the gals as well. you
Yeah.
know
And being
I was
tempted is a form of suffering. He knows what it is to suffer and experience temptation. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know. I don't know how many of us have actually had a face to face conversation with the devil and been tempted by the devil directly. And Jesus, he stood up to the devil in that, having all the inclinations that humans have. And so, if he can say no to that, what can we say no to?
Especially by his power working in us. Yep.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so how, I mean, Jesus is here to help us, and he knows what it's like to suffer and be tempted. But fight off this sexual sin that we may be, totally entrapped in, or that we may have a form of habitual sin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm going to share two things. So help me remember I said two things. um, the first is this is a simple exercise that I do with people, and it's a great one to share with a friend. So that way you have a person or a couple of people that you can have this common language with. But think about like a scale of 1 to 5. And 5 would be whatever sin it is, sexual or otherwise. What's the sin that I'm going to think about with this exercise? So maybe it's viewing pornography. And if acting out is a 5, being a 3 and being a 4 would be things that I would be doing or being around or influences that would be make me more inclined to act out and do the 5. But not all of the 3 and 4 things are sinful. Like for me, I can automatically be a 3 if I get less than 7 hours of sleep. Like, and that's not a sin. That's just a lack of sleep really affects me, my mood, my choices, my mouth. Like, um,
Well, you must have
so
got 8 hours of sleep last night then.
I did get a good night's sleep last night. Oh, and so I also spent some good time with Jesus today.
No, that's always good.
Yeah. So just think about what are the things that make you more inclined to act out in that sin? What are the patterns that you recognize? Are there certain people, certain days of the week, certain times of the day? I often find with sexual sin, nighttime is a time that more people act out. Well, that if I can identify those things, it also helps me to recognize what kind of safeguards can I put up for myself? What are things that I can do? Or recognize these are my areas of weakness before I get to acting out. So 3 and 4 would be, okay, I'm doing things or I'm already just in a position of weakness for whatever reason. And then a 1 and a 2 would be, man, I am doing the things when the Bible says put on. I am putting these things on. I'm thinking of like Colossians 3 and Ephesians 4, putting on and putting off. And so, what are the things I'm cultivating that are life giving, or just getting 8 hours of sleep at night, or spending time with the Lord and reading the Bible, and also doing the good coping things we talked about in the last episode? So even that, if you were to check in with a friend, it can be, hey, Keegan, like today, where are you on a 1 to 5 with this thing that you've shared? I'm not asking you to actually share that, Keegan, just FYI.
I would. Yeah, I'm an open
Okay.
book.
But it would be like the language that you could use. Or, hey, let me not wait to reach out to Max when I'm a 5. Let me reach out to Max when I recognize I'm a 3. And then I've got help so that I don't go into 4 and 5 territory. So it gives an easy language that's also a language I can use very publicly. And that's even just helping us be able to talk about hard things. Like my book title and cover does not have sex on it intentionally because I want people to be able to sit in a coffee shop and read this and not feel embarrassed with, a book about sex blatantly on the cover, because these things are already hard to talk about. So these are just helpful handles to help us talk about it. That was one.
I know. That was, yeah, you got two.
Yeah. But you talk back to me before I go into number 2.
No, I love how practical all this stuff is that you've shared up to this point, because it's so easy to be like, oh, I feel like whenever we talk about this, a lot of the answers that we get, a lot of the solutions that we get are super vague and super kind of broad, and just kind of like, oh, well, take away your triggers. And it's like, well, how do I identify those? And how do I talk about this? And so I just love how practical it is that you've given, the advice that you've given. And I'm excited for number 2 that you need to give.
But
Okay.
I also like the 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 method. As it like, if I have to text somebody or I'm helping somebody out, like and I just like have to ask him like, hey, are you alone? Like that's already just to set up for this. I'm like, hey, just give me 1 through 5. That's a lot simpler and, abstract, that where someone from the outside looking in wouldn't know what's going on. But to echo kind of what Max said, the practicality of I think it was Chip Ingram, when he's talking about, how he teaches the Bible. He's like, I'm going to tell you what it says. I'm going to tell you what it means. I'm going to tell you what it meant in this context. He said, but all of those mean nothing if you don't apply it. If you don't actually make it practical, don't put it into application. So the way that you explained it, I really enjoyed that.
Yeah. So, and it's practical because I need practical, man. And when I'm walking alongside people, like we need tangible things we can
Right.
do. This isn't, I'm following Jesus isn't abstract. It's very tangible.
No.
I've got a buddy who I'm notorious for over explaining things. I'll just explain it until it's dead. And
Keegan's a mansplainer.
I'm a mansplainer. I explain things well. But anyway, so he's like, I'll go on a rant and tell him something, explain something for like 5 minutes. He's like, so basically when you do this, this happens. I'm like, yeah, I like you.
You feel very validated when somebody can sum up what you just said and like repeat it back to you.
I'm like, yeah, for sure. Yeah. Don't worry that I took 5 minutes and you took 2 seconds. It doesn't bother me at all.
This buddy's me. No, I'm just playing.
No, it's not you.
It's not me.
Yeah, clarifying and summarizing. That's a good counseling strategy just in general. That's what that is.
So what I'm hearing you say is, help me understand. Yeah, those are some good ones I learned.
You've been practicing that on your girlfriend.
Yeah. We'll see if Kaylee listens and gives me a virtual elbow. Yeah.
She'll probably just punch me in the shoulder.
Oh, that's funny. That's good.
But a second tool, and this one is really simple. You can do it in under like 2 minutes a day. And this is one, again, it goes back to like gratitude and joy and how we can be rewiring our brains and changing how we view God. And so there's 4 prompts, and these are not original to me. I got them from some folks that I have done trauma training with. And so the first 2 prompts are 2 things that are true about the Lord. And so like even I do this one pretty much on a daily basis. And so a lot of times they're connecting to things that I read yesterday in the Bible. I actually do this before I read the Bible because it just helps me to think more relationally about God. So this is great if you're like, I'm not motivated to read the Bible. This is actually really helpful to do, and maybe even start here and do this for several days, even just to help yourself be more motivated to read and to see God as relational. But identify 2 truths about the Lord, and you can do God the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. And then the third thing is thank Him specifically for something. And so thanking God specifically for something reminds me that He is actively involved in my life, and what I have comes from Him. And so even that, it's helping me be in a relational posture. And then the 4th prompt is to take a promise or a truth from Scripture and personalize it. So an example would be, like the Bible says that God is always with us. So that would be the truth, but it would be personalizing it to say, Max, I am always with you. Or Keegan, I am with you today. And so even with that, because the Bible is God's word to us, so this is just putting my name or my pronouns and having it as though God is actually saying it to me right now. And so again, this is just helping us to see God as relational, to remind us of His involvement of our life, and to shape how we think about Him.
Yeah, I've actually, that last practice you talked about putting your name in the promises, like I've actually found that to be super helpful in my own life, just to add a little bit of, just to personalize it, especially in one particular place in Jesus's prayer, and I think it's John 17, I think is the chapter when, he's praying in the garden and he's talking about future believers, and, he's giving all these promises. Like, I've always just found that so like inspiring, that Jesus prayed for me. Like, I don't know, that's just super dope to think about.
So before we get wrap this up, I think I'm gonna just ask an off the wall question that doesn't fall under your professional your job title, but I'm just curious because it's really not that crazy of a question. I just like to hype it up and then ask a
Yeah,
really
dude.
simple question.
I'm getting scared over here.
I know. I'm feeling in the hot seat over here.
That's the plan. No, so you brought up reading the Bible, and you shared a couple helpful tips. But can you share a couple helpful tips for reading the Bible, studying the Bible, because I know those are things that can help combat sin of any kind. So could you just share some things that would be helpful in the context of this, and even also outside of the context of our conversation?
Yeah. So just share a little bit about reading and studying the Bible, just in general.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, in general. Yep.
You totally oversold that.
I know, that's my plan. Oversell, and then
under deliver.
Yeah, under deliver that.
Okay. Yeah. Well, let me just walk you through what I do. And I do want to caveat this to say, like, tailor this. And I have like a fast food version of what I do for those days where it's like, man, I slept through my alarm. And because let's be real, we all do that. And then I have like the home cooked meals version of what I do when, man, this is the time that I've carved out. So I do want to say that, like, some people that I encounter feel defeated before they even begin because they think it needs to be Instagram worthy, at least 30 minutes to an hour. And man, I've got to like pretty letter it if I'm a girl, and definitely have my coffee next to it. So I don't want people to not do it because what they would be doing is less than that picture image that they see on social media. And so even if it's like, I usually set an alarm in the morning so that I know when I need to get up to finish getting ready. And however early or late I wake up or snooze is how much time that I have. Now I take extended time on the weekends, but on my work days, that's how I do that. So some days it's 20 minutes, some days it's 40 minutes, some days it's 15 minutes. But don't let that keep you from doing it. So start small, start doable, and let's not beat ourselves up for it not meeting a picture perfect image. So when I do open the Bible, I'm currently going through First Thessalonians. I kind of go big book of the Bible, small book of the Bible. I typically go Old, New Testament. I switch back and forth. And I go at my speed. I hate reading plans with a passion. I hate them. They work for some people. I'm a perfectionist, and if I get off, it drives me insane. So I do however much I can imbibe that day. So today it was 3 verses, but you know what? I have good recall with those 3 verses. And so for me, I will jot down questions as I'm reading. Sometimes I'm especially if I'm having a hard time focusing, I'll even just summarize it just to help myself pay better attention. I do very much a train of consciousness with whatever comes to mind to pray for related to what I'm studying. So what's one thing that this verse that comes to mind to pray for? And right now with First Thessalonians, I'm very much with the Lord's return. And so that it brings up all kinds of things to pray for, about people that I want to see saved, about people I want to see come to know the Lord, and praying for that. So there's some summarizing that I'll do. What does this bring to mind to pray for? What are questions that this is bringing up? And kind of within that, there's what is this saying about the Lord that I'm looking for? And I usually have one or two commentaries that I'm reading. So after I've like maybe finished a section or a chapter, I'll go back and read the commentaries because I want to get answers to my questions.
Yeah. Right.
And or maybe I want to do a little bit more with the word study and those kind of things. So that's a brief snippet of what it looks like.
Yeah. I mean, we could
Uh,
do a whole podcast over that, and we're going to because I just wrote it down. So, um,
okay. I have another thing that I want to hit, that going back to the original kind of topic. How do one of your chapters in the book is how do we walk along others in battle? And I think that's kind of super important to hit because we don't want to do this struggle alone, and we know that other people don't want to do this struggle alone. So how do we help out others?
Mhm. Yeah. So, the one, if you already have a relationship, the 1 to 5 tool is a helpful one that you can do together or share with a friend that you trust. I would say disclosure conversations are super key here. So, whatever the person is disclosing to you that they struggle with, um, a few tidbits here. So, thank them for sharing because it's hard. It's hard to
Mhm.
be honest about our stuff and to let somebody really see us. So, express appreciation for it. And even within that, you can also just ask them how they're feeling about what they shared or what's the hardest part about what they're going through. And so even some of those things where you're just listening and you're just letting them share. Don't feel pressured to fix. That's not your job. That's probably not why the person's telling you.
Yeah.
So resist the urge to fix. Um,
It's
and
tough.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you don't know how to respond, you can even ask them like what would be helpful to you? Like you're sharing this with me and what would be helpful to you? Do you want me to just pray for you in this? Do you want me to check in or do you want me to just be a listening ear right now? So you can even ask and you can remind them if you feel like it's appropriate, remind them of what's true. Um, and be curious. Be curious about what does it feel like to be this person? What is it that they're experiencing? Being curious about where they are with the Lord. Oftentimes, I've found that what people disclose initially is not the root problem. And as the hearer, you can get caught up in what they initially disclose and not consider there's way more under the surface than that. And so if somebody's viewing pornography, there's reasons why they're viewing pornography. Viewing porn is the symptom, but that is not the root issue.
Hmm.
And if somebody's not a believer, that is a root issue in and of itself. So where is this
Yeah.
person with the Lord? Where are they emotionally? Where are they on a mental health level? Are they suicidal? Are they at risk to themselves or to others? Those are things that I need to be evaluating and just checking in on. Like, hey, are you okay? Hey, are you having dark thoughts? Um, so just depending on what a person shares, like responding and I will say, if somebody shares something hard with you and you never talk about it again, that can make somebody feel like they are being rejected and it can actually deepen their shame because it's like, man, I must have been too much. I must have been overwhelming because we've not talked about it again and they must not know what to do with me. So I'm not going to bring it, like, so you can also say, hey, I want to talk to you more about this, but I also want to respect that you may not always feel up to talking about it. And so do we need to set a time to talk about it again? What would be helpful to you on that front? But just being a good friend and not letting things slip through the cracks like that is super helpful.
Mhm.
And then making sure this would be probably more for women, but also it's important for guys. I don't need to be the only person that knows what's going on in somebody else's life. We need to share the load. And so usually I try to help people identify 2 or 3 safe people that they can share with. And for girls, there's some things with codependency I'm trying to avoid. And so I don't need to be the only person that knows, because I'm not always going to be available, and I shouldn't always be available.
Right.
But you need to have a couple of people that you can call, not just me. So share the load
Yeah.
is also huge.
Ashley's busy sleeping.
Getting her
I
8
do
hours.
put do not disturb on my phone at night. Yeah.
I'm not, sorry, available out of the office sleeping. Well, Ashley, thank you for bringing light to this topic that is so often kept in the dark. And really just want to express our gratitude to you for sharing this, and then also just agreeing to come on our podcast. We hope that this finds the proper ears. And for anyone that is wanting to hear more, go get her book right now. We will link that in the show notes, and she would greatly appreciate that. So, Ashley, if you have nothing else, I just want to say thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Appreciate y'all for delving into these topics.
You are so
Yeah,
welcome.
of course. They're real and they're prevalent. So it'd be a disservice to the church if we didn't talk about it. So with that being said, if there's nothing else, well, peace out, basic family.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Christian Campfire Conversations. I'll see you next week.